I would like to put out a public service announcement in the wake of a brief docu that Channel 13 put out about the police unit in Israel called yechidat tzur, whose job it is to follow released sex offenders and make sure that they don't reoffend. And they describe pretty wild things, including sex offenders who will WhatsApp them and say, I am about to rape someone, you better stop me from doing it, which sounds crazy, but that's some of the things that they're dealing with. And the whole gist of the video was, the way I understood it, was basically to say, look how amazing it is that we've got this police unit which is preventing, some of the most dangerous sex offenders in the country from reoffending. Which, while obviously we should have a lot of gratitude to the police officers that are doing this, there's something which is really important to know. And that is that very, very roughly speaking, research shows, and if anybody's interested, you can send me a message and I'll give you the links for this research. Research shows that, again, very roughly speaking, for every one sex offender that will be identified, there's another 9 that we don't know about. So while it's heartening to know that you've got this, very efficient, very effective, very technologically advanced police unit dealing with these released sex offenders to do their best to prevent them, and they claim that they have a 98% of efficacy rate, that they prevent 98% of these released sex offenders from reoffending, and there's 2% that not. But even if we're not even thinking about just them, the ones that are in jail, the ones that are in the process of being identified, that means that there's a lot more people that are offending, and they're operating in what researchers refer to as the dark field, because nobody knows about them. So at first glance, that sounds really, really awful, really disheartening. But here's the public service announcement. There's actually something that we can all do to at least minimize the opportunities that sex offenders have to offend. So in particular, when it comes to the most egregious type of offenses, like full-blown rape, that almost is never going to happen just in broad daylight right on the street. The offender is going to have to find an opportunity to be secluded with his or her. Most offenders are male, not female, but not exclusively. So he's going to have to find a way to get secluded with his victim in order to be able to do something like that. And after speaking to experts in the field who have dealt with many, not dozens, hundreds, if not thousands of cases, what that often looks like, bashetach, is that the offender will go from building to building to try to see where there's a machsan that the door is not locked, that he could use as a place of doing what he wants to do. So here's a very simple thing that we as a society and individuals can do to minimize the opportunities that offenders have to offend. If you have a machsan, make sure it's locked. The default should be locked. And if there's, in the building, which there usually is, a bunch of machsanim, and then there's that room where you access all the machsanim, so that outer door also should be locked. The default is that it should be locked. It's not such a difficult thing to do, I don't think, to have a lock, which is relatively easy to open. You can get the code, etc. Now, to be clear, this is not going to prevent all cases of heinous abuse. But if society as a whole, if as many individuals as possible do this type of thing, whether it's a machsan, whether it's a side room, and by the way, this applies to schools, it applies to shuls, it applies basically to anywhere, where you just kind of take stock of the situation, very similar to the way, by the way, that you would do with fire safety or water safety. So if you have a swimming pool, you want to make sure that there's a gate around it and that it has a lock. And if, you've got hand towels that you keep near the burners, so move them away, and so on and so forth. It's not a matter of being neurotic and always wondering, oh my goodness, what might be lurking around the corner. It's just realizing that we live in a world that overall is safe, but there are some dangers, and we're supposed to do whatever we can to try to mitigate those dangers and minimize the possibility of those dangers actualizing as much as we can. And of course, leave the rest up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So, you just take stock of your situation. And if you are the one in charge of a shul, so, just go to the shul and see, are there any rooms that are left open that could theoretically be taken advantage of by someone who wants to perpetrate a crime? So just lock them. Make sure that the default is that they're locked when they're not in use. If there are machsanim in a residential building, or parking spots, or bushes that are growing too wild in a way that makes it that people could go behind there. Whenever you have a situation where an offender could theoretically take advantage of that situation to seclude himself with his victim, so to whatever degree you neutralize that opportunity, you are minimizing the possibility of abuse occurring. And I think that's great news, because it means that with a relatively very small amount of effort, you could save the life of a human being. You could literally save someone from suffering, such horrible suffering for the rest of their life. So yeah, if you live in a building, which you probably do, or if you attend a shul, which you probably do, or if you ever, have opportunity to go to school, if you're a teacher, if you're an administrator, just take the time, take a few minutes to just take stock of the situation and see where are those gaps that can be closed so as to minimize the opportunities that offenders have. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help us that we should hopefully hear less and less and less of this type of awful thing, and hopefully eventually see it gone completely. So yeah, take the time to do it, because it could really make the difference in a child's life, or an adult's life for that matter.